maybe. Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Today is Thursday, January 4th, 2024, and we are very glad that you have joined us. This is our first live program of the new year, 2024. I'm Mary Massey with co-host John SAKOWICZ. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to our audience listening to the broadcast live here in Northern California, and also to our audience listening nationally and internationally to the web stream. I want to say that in this last holiday season, I renewed my membership to your community radio station, KMUD, and for whoever becomes a member during this show or renews their membership, I will send you, I bought a box of Norman Solomon's book. I will send you through the station a copy of Norman's most recent book, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine, War Made Invisible. A wonderful read. We're very lucky to have Norman and Richard as our guests on the show.
Right. Today's program will be archived at kmud.org and our program website, heroespatriots.org, plus all the social media. Views and opinions expressed by our speakers today are not necessarily those of the board, staff, underwriters, and volunteers at KMUD. Equal time will be made available for those of differing opinions. I do want to remind listeners that they can call in with questions on topic. The number to call, 707-923-3911, and we do ask that you try and be as brief as possible. And as John mentioned, joining us today are Norman Solomon and Richard Silverstein. Mr. Solomon is a journalist, activist, and former candidate for Congress. He is the founder of rootsaction.org, and he recently authored the article, Huffman Remains Evasive While Palestinian Civilians Die, and we're going to talk about that article. And Richard Silverstein is the founder of Tikkun Olam. He is a journalist and activist, and both gentlemen are returning as our guests to this program. And before we begin, I want to make mention that we reached out several times to Congressman Jared Huffman to be a part of this discussion, and he did decline, and the article that Mr. Solomon has written kind of deals with the issue of what Congress is not doing for our country.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And Mary, Huffman's refusal to be on the show is a story in and of itself, and we're going to talk about that here on the show because it is eerily reminiscent of former Harvard President Claudia Gay's refusal to denounce and condemn anti-Semitism and hate crimes against Jews. Here we have, members of Congress qualifying, their condemnation of Islamophobia and Israel's war crimes in Gaza. It's both positions, both by Gay and by some members of Congress, just morally reprehensible, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And today is I think it's day 89 of the conflict in the Middle East, and we're gonna look at your article, Norman. First of all, welcome to the program, both of you gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Great. What section of your article you say? In mid-October, there was an opportunity for members of Congress to take a clear stand for a ceasefire. 18 Democrats in the House signed on as co-sponsors of the ceasefire resolution. But Jared Huffman chose not to be among them, and he is still not a co-sponsor. Can we start there?
Yes, my article appeared last Saturday in the daily paper as it happened in Jared Huffman's home county, Marin County, the Marin Independent Journal. And my concern, and I think the concern of an increasing number of constituents, is that while the death toll rises, and more than half of the estimated more than 20,000 civilians who have died in the last 3 months in Gaza are children and women,
Right.
there has been a lot of equivocation and failure among members of Congress to speak out and speak up. And we should keep in mind that it is the Congress that appropriates the funds for the weapons that are being used right now in Gaza to create so much agony, so much pain, so much death and destruction. I do want to say from the outset that I think what we need so badly is a single standard of human rights, so that we don't get tangled up and go down the rabbit holes of this person's life is more important than that person's life,
Yeah.
which is often implicit based on our emotions, our biases, our identification with a particular religion or nationality. It's the single standard of human rights that can enliven our humanity and our bonds with each other. All children are equally precious, and whether they are Israeli Jews, whether they are Palestinian Muslims, we need desperately to foment and nurture that sense of a single standard. And while we must condemn, really have to unequivocally and should unequivocally condemn what Hamas did on October 7th,
Mm-hmm.
we also need to condemn on the similar humanitarian, humane basis, the slaughter that is going on, that has continued now for several months in Gaza. And it's especially important, and I'd sort of close on this point. Here in the United States, we have elected people who are sending these weapons and these mortars and these shells and these missiles that are tearing the bodies of little children, of civilians who are no more accountable for this slaughter that took place on October 7th than somebody at a shopping mall in Humboldt or Mendocino or Marin counties. So
Right.
we need this single standard, and that's where accountability comes in. If our elected officials aren't stepping up, we have to.
Richard, do you want to weigh in on that thought?
I think in terms of developing a single standard, we should talk about international law. The South Africa has just filed a case against Israel, charging it with genocide, and it filed an 84-page brief, which all of the international legal scholars that I've seen have endorsed strongly. And of course, our spokespeople for the State Department and for the National Security Council, U.S. National Security Council, have derided and denounced the filing. And I think that this is filed with the International Court of Justice. I don't think I mentioned that. And it's a very strong case, and it's very hard to prove genocide as an international law standard. But they included multiple statements by multiple Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu, documenting that Israel's intent is to commit Jewish genocide. So I think it's a strong case, and it would reaffirm that single legal standard that Norman was talking about.
Norman, you write about the single standard, an absolute standard for human rights. And again, Congressman Huffman wrote to us in part, and I quote, this is verbatim: absolute positions like Norman Solomon's can sound good to people who are rightfully dismayed by the conflict. But as a congressman, I don't have the luxury of ignoring complexities and consequences. Sounds like a way out. What do you think?
Well, we take absolute positions all the time. The congressman takes absolute positions that we don't want to have a climate emergency increase on the planet several Celsius degrees, that we don't want to destroy the environment, that women have a right to reproductive freedom, We take positions that we don't want black people consigned to Jim Crow. We have all sorts of positions that we take that are absolutist. But somehow when it comes to challenging the U.S. government support, unequivocal support for Israel, no matter how many civilians are slaughtered, all of a sudden that's absolutist. And I say in the article that if members of Congress had to dig their own children out of the rubble and then bury them, maybe we wouldn't have so much eagerness to appropriate these billions of dollars of weapons. Maybe we wouldn't have Congressman Huffman suddenly saying, in this particular case, we shouldn't be absolutist. So in some moral issues, we should be absolutist. That is a reality. And something I will add, that numbers never convey the humanity of people who are lost and the grieving of those who are left behind. And
why shouldn't Jared Hoffman be held to the same standard as Claudine Gay?
Well, it's called, and to me, it's a different case. We're talking about somebody who has repeatedly voted to send these weapons to Israel that are now killing civilians as we speak. And here's somebody who, on the other hand, is elected and is supposed to be accountable. And I would also turn this to our listeners. Inside the 2nd Congressional District, which goes from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border along the coast, we have a responsibility. Just because we agree with some things that a congressperson says, that doesn't mean we let them off the hook. We don't work for them. They work for us. That's the idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I just jump in here?
Yeah.
I noticed a coded phrase in his Huffman statement, and that is the conflict is too complex to get into all of the details of it. And that is a dodge that is commonly used by the Israel lobby and those who are allied with it, saying there's too much information, there's too much complexity, moral complexity, and it's not a simple issue that people can just sort of dive into and immediately know what the right response is. Well, that's really disgusting, because it is a simple issue. It's a simple issue of morality. It's a simple issue of genocide. There's no complexity involved in what is going on now in Gaza. And they want you, the Israel lobby wants you to feel like it's so complicated that you can't possibly understand all the details of it. And that that suppresses opposition. It suppresses voters from really feeling confident in taking a position or making their voice known in voting for congressional representatives.
That's a key point. And really, I would add, Richard's making an absolutely crucial point, because we are constantly told, leave it to the experts. We were told that during the Vietnam War. They know more than we do. It is so complicated and so forth. And that is, along with being a dodge, it is a way to prevent democracy. It's a pat on the head to say, oh, you live in this county, that county, in my district. You are really not as sophisticated to make these decisions. That's how people get slaughtered. That's how atrocities continue.
Right. And the other side that we hear is that, well, it's been a problem that has resisted a solution for the last 70 years. So, why would a solution emerge now?
Yeah, well, we might ask why it's resisted a solution. We're told that the U.S. has been an honest broker, and that's an absurdity. The United States has been a dishonest broker, manipulating, and that is a fact that we should face. I do want to say that this isn't just a show. This is about a call to people listening to us, especially within the Huffman district. It would take you about 2 minutes if you have any access online. You just Google Jared Huffman, you go to his website, there's a contact button, send him an email, tell him what you think. Maybe you agree with him, maybe you don't. Let him know what you think, and also organize, because if we don't organize, he's going to go along on his merry way.
Well, right. It's funny that you talk about registering your opposition to what I perceive to be his apathy. towards this issue. You ran against Huffman back in 2012, and in my opinion, Huffman has not had a meaningful opponent since. Um, our district is almost a gerrymandered district. It is so blue. It is so overwhelmingly registered Democrats versus a few Republicans. Anyone like Huffman who gets elected could probably expect to remain in office for life. What can we do to change this, gentlemen?
Richard?
I would say something we can do to change this is to take much more seriously the electoral process at every stage, whether it's Board of Supervisors or Congress or anything else. It's not an impulse item. It's not that you wait till you get to the supermarket checkout and maybe you see a candy bar you want to grab. This takes organizing. This takes planning. This takes months and actually years to develop a campaign that can win, because the obstacles, and in this case, very clear. There's a huge amount of money from AIPAC, from others who want to squelch any single standard that might be applied by a member of Congress to this conflict in the Middle East. So I encourage people to not only make your views known to the congressperson, and even more important, to your local media outlets, but also think about how you can work with others to change the climate of political discourse and power.
It's 16 minutes past the hour, and we have our first caller for the show. If you would like to call in, 707-923-3911. Caller, if you're listening, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, my name is Pat Rosenfield, and I do not live in the district, but of course, your point about holding our representatives accountable on both sides and all sides of the issues that we care about is very important, and Republicans as well as Democrats. But I'm asking about the bigger question. How are we going to hold Hamas accountable? And by holding Hamas accountable, do you think we will also be able to arrive at the biggest question that John actually raised, and that is how to bring about a peaceful solution to the morass of the Middle East, this particular part of the Middle East?
Thank you.
That's a very good question, and I'd love to hear Richard's thoughts as well. I would just say that we have a situation where the United States government is subsidizing what Israel is doing. We are not subsidizing what Hamas is doing. That's a key point. Of course, we should condemn when Hamas slaughters civilians. There's no question about that. At the same time, we don't support, and we don't fund, and we don't provide diplomatic cover for Hamas. Quite the opposite. By we, I mean the people of the United States through paying our taxes and our government. So we should condemn all. We should make clear, however, that we have a special accountability and a culpability in this conflict. And one other thing to note, every single killing from Hamas, from the Israeli government, that takes the life of a civilian, we unequivocally condemn. At the same time, when you look at the magnitude in the last 3 months, 1,200 people killed by Hamas, and upwards of 20,000 civilians with our tax dollars killed by the Israeli government.
Gentlemen, we have 2 callers waiting. Let's go start with the first one. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Well, that might be me.
That's you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, well, I have a lot to say, but other people do too.
Right.
And the first thing that comes to mind is something that was purported to be what Einstein said, that the pioneers of a warless world will be those who refuse military service. And I'm giving a pause for that to sink in.
Okay.
Before I say that, I'm not counting on anything from elected officials. I mean, it's all corrupt. And it's mostly corrupt. And so I've never felt I lived in a democracy. I'm 76 years old. And I suggest we're going to have to do it ourselves. And right. How do we do that? Well, we just we have more similarities than we have differences. the differences are made up because we all have the same needs. And I want us to know this. Okay. The other thing I want to say is my own insight is that our words either imprison us or set us free. So I insist on using words that set me free, such as the pioneers of a warless world.
Yeah, we're going to pause there and let the man answer. And thank you for your call. Richard?
I'd like to move back to something that Norman was talking about, and that is the power of the Israel lobby on our electoral process and also perverting democracy. In the last 2022 elections, in all of the Democratic primaries alone, not Republican primaries, AIPAC and its allied PACs, there are two others, spent $30 million in primaries to defeat progressive Democratic candidates, ensuring that they didn't get to the general election and they were in blue districts. And Summer Lee in Pennsylvania, Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar, all of those members of the Progressive Caucus, the squad, had to fight desperately against these wads of cash. And Summer Lee now says, Cory Bush, another progressive, says that these PACs are going to spend $100 million. And all of that money is coming from billionaire GOP hedge fund managers who are pro-Israel, all of it. So in addition to making our voices known through contacting our Congress members and the media, I think that even though many of us don't have a lot of funds, I think donating whatever you can to progressive candidates also makes your voice heard. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, because if millions of us contribute $5 or $10, that will offset the billions that the hedge fund billionaires are funneling into these electoral these primaries.
Thank you, Richard. Norman, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's a key point, and it reminded me of the old lyrics from the Doors. They have the guns and we have the numbers. They have the gazillionaires. We have so many people who are deeply concerned and increasingly justifiably outraged by the situation that we've been talking about. And while it's multifactorial and you don't know what's going on inside somebody's head, it's very plausible that a major reason why Congressman Huffman, like so many others who are incumbents, are not taking a moral position about the slaughter that goes on in Gaza as we speak, is that they're terrified of being primaried, not by the grassroots, but by AIPAC and the so-called Democratic Majority for Israel organization that can dump millions of dollars into the ad sphere to oppose them. And the only way to counter that is on programs like this, independent media, grassroots organizing, reaching out to people we know, and fielding candidates and campaigns that can really challenge this kind of moral corruption.
We have another caller, I believe, Dorothy. Is that correct? Caller, if you're listening, you're next in line. Go ahead with your question.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay. There's some analysts on that are looking at the situation, basically frame it as this, basically, Israel and our support for Israel is pretty much about, controlling the Middle East oil reserves so that we can continue our economic grip or dominance in the world. I don't know if you can call it that anymore, but basically, as of, I think yesterday even, there was a terrorist bombing in Iran and a missile launched into Lebanon, if I'm correct. And basically, some people are saying that that's essentially Netanyahu's kind of trying to hit one of his last grasp at power and basically an attempt to draw the U.S. into military conflict with the greater Middle East. Well, basically trying to provoke the surrounding countries into starting something. They've withheld basically jumping into the fray and trying to keep stability and basically the focus on Hamas's plight. So anyways, my question is, and it sounds like the U.S. is not in a good position to be able to fight any kind of successful war in the Middle East. So I don't think that U.S. wants to jump in. I'm wondering if either of your guests has an idea about, like, if that tactic is going to be successful, if basically Iran and some of the surrounding countries are kind of forced to respond to these provocations by Netanyahu. All right, thank you.
Thank you for calling in.
If I could jump in here.
Okay. Richard?
I think that the U.S. is already intervening, already involved in what's going on in the region. And there's a real danger of expanding this and making it into a regional conflict because Hamas is part of the axis of resistance, which constitutes Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq, all of whom are activated now against Israel and against the United States, primarily so far, and they're attacking U.S. troops in Syria and U.S. troops in Iraq as well. So this is becoming a regional war, extremely dangerous. Israel is trying to suck us into a war. It's attacking Lebanon now after Gaza, and because it has these vengeance that it wants to do against Hamas, and it's always seen Hezbollah as its strongest frontline enemy. And Biden is doing nothing to stop this. He's feeble sort of attempts at saying, begging, please don't do this of Netanyahu. And we have the Houthis, by the way, also launching missiles at U.S. warships and U.S. warships. And now a Navy helicopter actually destroyed 3 boats of the Houthis. This is the first weapons that have been used by the U.S. Against targets in the Middle East. So we're really going down a very slippery slope.
Right. Before we take the next caller, Norman, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I think these are crucial dynamics. And from the U.S. news media, you would think history started on October 7th of this year. Point of fact, according to the UN, the largest cholera epidemic in human history has occurred in Yemen as a result of the 8-year war led by Saudi Arabia with the political and military and arms sales support of the U.S. government under 3 presidents, from Obama on to Trump on to Biden. And the reality is that while we're told now the United States is defending U.S. troops in Syria and Iraq, what are they doing there in the first place?
Right.
2 years ago plus, President Biden went to the United Nations and said that the United States has turned a page and is no longer at war. And that was a lie then. It's a bigger lie now. I document in my book, War Made Invisible, that at that time Biden made this speech, the U.S. was involved in counterinsurgency and other so-called war on terror military activities in 85 countries. The problem now is so manifold, and it boils down to, in many respects, not all respects, the U.S. is a major military player in the Middle East, supporting aggression. And I would close on this point. You probably heard of the, quote, rules-based order. We hear about it from Secretary of State Blinken. We hear about it from President Biden. And what the rules-based order is, when you dig underneath, the rhetoric is from Washington, we make the rules, we break the rules. We make it up, we do whatever the heck we want, because ultimately our policy is might makes right.
Right. 30 minutes past the hour. If you've just tuned in, we are speaking to Norman Solomon and Richard Silverstein. This is Heroes and Patriots. We have a couple callers waiting. If you'd like to join into the discussion, 707-923-3911. Dorothy, do we have our next caller? Caller, if you're listening, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, Ms. Massey, and hi, John SAKOWICZ. This is Jeff Wright on the Mendocino Coast. And
hey, good morning, Jeff.
Especially say hi to both Mary and John. I've known them for a long time in their previous iteration, and I'm so glad that you were able to transition to the mud. Norman Solomon and your other guest, Richard, I believe.
Yes.
I talked to you, Norman Solomon, when you were on Jimmy Derschlag's show a few years ago, Global Stuff, and I suggested that since K-Mud is probably one of the most important effective tools, I don't want to use the word weapons, to fight the powers that be, if you could possibly maybe put up a couple of your books as an augmentation to John's offer concerning people becoming members. It is so important that we keep this essential station going, especially so we can dump on Trump. And that is my request. And Richard, to you, I don't know if you have any publications, but maybe as somebody else who separately can become a member, so we double the number of members possibly on this offer that John made, that we could maybe do that. Now, my question is this. With all the wars in cumulative nature between the end of World War II and now, I look at what's going on currently as World War 4.4, with all the digital drones, etc. And I'm wondering if you see the current situation in the world as basically an undeclared world war. We're certainly slipping in that direction. And what can we possibly do? What would you like to see Congress do if you were there, both of you, to stop the madness? And I really appreciate this show and who's on today. I will leave it there. Keep up the wonderful work that all four of you are doing.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Norman, Richard?
We're slipping in the direction of more and more military conflagration, parallel to the not climate crisis, but climate emergency. Big money is having such a huge effect. And the biggest climate polluter, by the way, on the planet, single entity, is the Pentagon. At the same time, directly to that question, we need to challenge and curtail the militarism that exists in the United States. The caller used the word madness. Martin Luther King Jr. denounced in 1967 what he called the madness of militarism. He wasn't being hyperbolic, and he said that at that time that the enormous military spending was, in his words, a demonic destructive suction tube. And if you go through Mendocino or Humboldt or Marin County or virtually anywhere else in this country, you see the terrible shortage of health care and education and housing, all the ways that it affects our lives. So in terms of the well-being of people in this country and the world, huge reductions in military spending and a complete 180 on U.S. foreign policy would be crucial. We no longer should try to be the enforcer of some double standard to advance the interests of U.S. geopolitical strategists and corporations and trying to inflict leverage for favorable trade deals and extraction of raw materials. And the other point is the geopolitical positioning in the region, in the Middle East. And there are a lot of factors, but certainly oil is one of them.
Richard?
If I could steer the conversation in a slightly different direction, I wanted to talk about President Biden and the 2024 election. And I wanted to point out that all of the public opinion polls about American views on Gaza show that Biden's policies are extremely unpopular. And also, we have a year until the 2024 election. and I think he's in danger of losing the election. I think there'll be a lot of issues that contribute to people's voting in a year's time. But I think this is becoming, and the longer this war goes on, the more impact this issue is going to have. It's even more unpopular among Democrats than it is in the general population. So we've got an unpopular war, which we're very familiar with in our recent history. And but in this case, is going to topple Biden. And he seems to have absolutely no understanding of that. And he is not willing to put any pressure on Israel to end the war, which is what needs to happen right now. And I, for one, am completely flummoxed. I do not understand what is going through his head. And he is blaming messaging for not getting the message out. But the message is inexcusable and indefensible.
I would jump in. I completely agree with that. And I think that Biden's playing from an old playbook. You just do whatever Israel wants. You're so afraid of the Israel lobby that you basically heal, and there's controversy. Is the tail wagging the dog? What's the tail? I think they're wagging each other. Ultimately, we have a situation now where the likely Republican nominee is a fascist at this point and a terrible militarist, and the likely Democratic nominee is a neoliberal and a militarist. And in this case, he is completely, despite the rhetoric, completely in the hands of Netanyahu in terms of policy. Because when it comes down to it, Biden has been part of this entire process. He has not done what could be done to throw down the gauntlet and say to Biden, or Biden saying to Netanyahu, stop slaughtering the civilians in Gaza. So President Biden is an accomplice to mass murder.
Yeah. 37 minutes past the hour. We have a couple callers waiting. First caller, if you're with us, go ahead with your question.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on.
Thank you so very much. I'd like to thank KMUD for hosting today. I'd like to thank the esteemed guests for being present today. I'd like to say that I echo the previous caller's sentiment about raising the voice of KMUD, because when the voices of the heads of educational institutions, when people are being marginalized for using speech in a country where speech is supposed to be protected and free, as academics, and they're marginalized for using academic speech by people who are bombasts, it's a threat that reason will decline. My question is this, and again, briefly, Chris Hedges was on this station several weeks ago on New Dimensions, and he spoke to a broader spectrum of the Israel incursion in Gaza, talking about their mechanizations, their AI, all of this targeted assassination, and that it is a proving ground for World War, that those tools are being meted and used there in order to be using them. And we just saw an assassination in Beirut. We saw an American journalist, Kamal Khashoggi, assassinated. We're watching governments reach over international borders using technology to assassinate their political foes and quelling speech. Free speech radio, let's all stand together, folks, in peace. If we have an argument, let's settle it. Assalamu alaikum, and peace be with you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, caller, for your air. And thank you, KMUD, for all that you do. Shows like ours, and we have a bigger platform than you might expect, because we're pretty aggressive about using various distribution channels, but also Democracy Now! And Tom Hartman's show, everything that Norman and Richard do in their podcast, everything that other guests of ours do, like Francis Boyle and Matt Ho and Colleen Rowley and Ray McGovern. We just all raise up our voices on these independent channels, and it's so important to support them. Again, I renewed my membership this holiday season, and I hope you do too.
So, gentlemen, do you want to comment on the last caller's words?
Yeah, I do. And also on what John was just saying, there are some ideologies that one might choose from, and some of them we might justifiably repudiate, and others we might embrace. One that I embrace is what you could call whoism. You might remember Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hears a Who. And one voice is not going to do it, but a combination of voices is really crucial. And that's where community radio and all the different outlets that are not run by big money are absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Richard, did you want to weigh in on the last caller, or shall we go ahead?
Go ahead.
All right, let's take the next caller, please. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, number one, I wanted to say that as far as I can tell, I think the reason why the United States supports Israel is because we need an ally in the United States and an ally with the United States. Pardon me, we need an ally in the Middle East. But the other thing is, it seems to me that Joe Biden doesn't have the power to just tell other countries what to do. He doesn't lead those countries. And the other thing is that the media seems to really, really support Hamas. Now, Hamas's mission statement has always been that they want to kill all the Jews. That's what from the river to the sea means. Kill all the Jews from the river to the sea and take all of the land that is now Israel. And they are the ones that started this by attacking Israel out of the blue on October 7th. And nobody seems to chastise them for that. And I keep hearing about all the children that are killed. And I think
Richard's bursting out of his skin.
Thank you, caller. We're going to hear what Richard thinks about your comments.
Look, Israel is the overwhelmingly most powerful entity in the Middle East. Its military is among the most powerful in the world. And it has killed 65,000 Palestinians going back to 1920. And the Palestinians have killed 6,000 Israelis during that period. So that's a factor of 6 to 1. The Palestinians are engaged in armed resistance against a foreign occupier. And the UN General Assembly resolution said that it is legitimate for an occupied people to engage in armed resistance. And what Hamas did on October 7th, while I certainly denounce what it did, you have 20 Palestinians being murdered in Gaza now for every Israeli who has died. So I think that it's very important. I want to also say about the Hamas charter, which you mentioned, that is erroneous information. The 2017 revision of the Hamas charter actually says that Hamas will join the PLO and it expects there to be elections and that it is willing to end armed resistance as long as the U.S. and Israel agree to that proposal. And when it was put in 2017 to the U.S., Biden said no. And Israel got Biden to say no. So Hamas, even though it's certainly not an angel in this whole situation, it has done what it should be doing in terms of showing flexibility. And when it was turned away by Biden and Israel, that is when it started to plan the attack on 10/7. So we have to keep in mind the preponderance of violence and genocide that is being committed by the United States, which is far greater in proportion to whatever the Palestinians are able to do.
Thank you, Richard. Norman?
Something I would add is that, and I appreciate that the caller phoned in and spoke her mind, it's preposterous to say that Biden doesn't have power over the situation. The president continues to advocate for and sign legislation, appropriations that send these billions of dollars worth of weapons to Israel. So just as his previous presidents did, the current president, Biden, is making all this possible by sending all of this weaponry along. That's just reality. And just one example here. Yesterday, The Nation magazine published a piece by Trita Parsi, and he said, and I'm quoting here, Biden has shipped more than 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition to Israel, twice sidestepped congressional oversight to expedite the arms transfers, twice vetoed resolutions at the UN Security Council calling for a ceasefire. This is the kind of policy that the U.S. government is pursuing.
Yeah,
the supplemental aid bill that Biden has sent to Congress would provide $14 billion to Israel for weapons. It's an overall appropriation of $113 billion. And that goes to all of the weapons we're sending. We're sending JDAM bombs, we're sending missiles, all sorts of things. And there's an important point here, is that within that supplemental bill, there is funding to provide for Gazans who will be expelled from Gaza and sent to the Sinai. And they want to provide tents for a tent city, and Israel wants to expel all 2.5 million Gazans and send them into the Sinai desert. And we have, as the U.S. has supported that, we have sent Secretary Blinken to Jordan and Egypt, asking them to take Gazan refugees, not refugees because they'll be expelled. And we have done, Sarah Roy, a professor at Harvard, says that one of her colleagues was approached by USAID and asked how feasible would it be in terms of humanitarian aid to build tent cities in the Sinai. We are culpable in genocide. We aren't even accessories to genocide. We're an active participant in it, and it is shameful that this would happen.
This aspect is so infuriating. And to get back to Congressman Huffman, and this is the case for many others in Congress, tacitly and explicitly in many ways, backing the Biden administration policies, which Richard has just laid out another key facet. We can remember back to 1999 when President Clinton denounced what he called ethnic cleansing, and you could make a case that Milosevic and the Serbian government was engaged in ethnic cleansing Kosovo, and bombing them was a whole other question, and was based on a lot of mythology in terms of the narrative. But my point is that when the United States is willing to go to war with the argument that we must prevent ethnic cleansing, which is what President Clinton said, and the U.S. media and the Congress agreed, and turns around and on a much larger scale is engaged in ethnic cleansing as well as genocide against the people of Palestine, we're not only in an Orwellian zone, we are in a deep, deep moral abyss.
We're speaking with Norman Solomon and Richard Silverstein. We have about 10 minutes left in this version of Heroes and Patriots, and I believe we have another caller. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Okay, yes. It's a great show, by the way. And history is so important for a population to understand, to be able to make a decent decision on what's going on today. However, our educational system in this country is very, very deficient in history for the young people. So how do we expect them to vote appropriately or to understand the issues? It's not happening. What it is the red team or the blue team for the most part. That's what's so sad about it. And the other thing I wanted to say is that didn't Hitler ask the other countries to take in the Jews? Didn't he ask them, you want the Jews? Take the Jews. Didn't the United States, Britain, and all the other countries refuse it? I'll take your answer off the air.
Thank you, caller. Important question.
I wanted to talk about the Nazi issue. Before 1941, the Nazis believed in voluntary relocation of the Jews of Europe. They supported sending Jews to Israel, and they wanted to get rid of the Jews on a voluntary basis. And that's exactly what Israel wants to do. And the Biden administration is talking about supporting voluntary relocation of the people of Gaza. So we are engaged in the same type of activity that the Nazis engaged in. And I want to say that after 1941, they changed it to an extermination policy. So I'm not talking about that per se, although we can talk about the genocide happening in Gaza in similar terms. But the ethnic cleansing issue is extremely important, and it goes back to what the Nazis were trying to do to the Jews in Europe.
Yeah. Norman?
The idea that because Jews, and I speak as a human being, I happen to be an American Jew. The idea that what happened during the Nazi regime in any way justifies what Israel is doing to Palestinians is just obscene. It's beyond contemptible. The human beings who the U.S. is aiding Israel to kill en masse are people who have suffered from the weight of the arrogance, the propaganda, and the weaponry provided from this country. And I do want to say that when you look at the numbers, as I said earlier, numbers are not people, but the 20,000 who've already been killed, civilians almost entirely in Gaza, unfortunately, that's just part of what is happening. You have many more injured. You have virtually, the vast majority of housing destroyed and diseases setting in. And that is by calculation. Anybody who thinks that the Israeli government doesn't know that that is happening and wanting it to happen, I will sell you the Golden Gate Bridge really cheap. And at the top of the U.S. government, they also know that predictably massive diseases, often fatal, are setting in. So when you look at the numbers, it is very plausible that hundreds of thousands of Palestinian people now in Gaza will be dying in the near future. And yet we have this pretense from Congress people like Jared Huffman that it's so complex that we can't take a clear stand, and he's unwilling to.
Right.
Well,
John?
yeah, I want to note that on this program, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and other American Jews. Richard and I went to the same synagogue as kids, Temple Beth Shalom. Norman, self-identified American Jew. Mary, you're part Jewish.
Right.
If you look up my last name, Kazimierz Sakowicz, Kazmierz Sakowicz, was the first journalist to document the mass murder of Jews in 1942. And Nazis found him out and assassinated him in Operation Tempest. So Jews can be the peace activists. And Jews are the peace activists. There's a very important peace movement in Israel as well. Do you gentlemen care to talk about that? Why so many Jews here are silent or afraid to speak up for incurring the wrath of AIPAC, but in Israel itself, you have a very viable Green Party peace movement?
Well, it used to be more the case. I think the political trend inside Israel and then the horrific events of October 7th inside Israel have been manipulated by the government there. And a lot of the responsibility, I believe, is here in the United States because the U.S. is the motor engine for the slaughter to a large degree in Gaza.
I just want to add, I think the issue of being a Jew in this conflict is very important to me. And I approach these issues as a Jew, as someone steeped in the Jewish tradition, and as someone who is horrified that Israel is repeating the crimes, the types of crimes that made victims of Jews during the Holocaust. And that's the lens through which I look at all of this. very much as a Jew who is horrified that Israel speaks in the name of all Jews around the world, which provokes anti-Semitism, by the way, and makes Jews victims outside of Israel because those supporting those Muslims and white supremacists see us as representatives of the state of Israel, which we are not. And I want to tell your audience, it's extremely important not to confuse Jews and Israel, because Israel is a nation and Jews are a religion. They are not the same. And we must not say that we are responsible or Jews are responsible in general for the crimes that Israel is committing.
Good point. We have about 2 minutes, and we have some.
We have a lot of callers.
One question is, why were there not the same outrage against George Bush for all the people killed in Iraq? That was a question that came in. Can we quickly address that?
Well, there was. I mean, at Institute for Public Accuracy, where I work, we were churning out news releases of outrage. We were in the streets. There were huge turnouts of people protesting before and during the U.S. war on Iraq.
And we're doing that now. American Jewish groups like Jewish Voice for Peace have put tens and hundreds of thousands of people in the streets in D.C., here in Seattle, I know in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. So there is opposition there is grassroots opposition to what's happening in Gaza. There isn't enough, but as the war continues, it's getting stronger.
We have callers in the queue. Real quick, 15 seconds apiece. Tell us where listeners can find out more about your respective work.
I write Tikkun Olam blog at richardsilverstein.com, and I publish in several publications you can read about on my website.
Yes, I'm at normansolomon.com, and we're at rootsaction.org. We're an activist group, and we're online at rootsaction.org.
All right, let's take one more question, one more caller rather, before we have to sign off. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Yes, hello, it's Dylan in Eureka. I just want to let you know that the Hamas charter says specifically in multiple places that the whole purpose of their charter is to create a state where there are no more Jews. And so when you hear Free Palestine or From the River to the Sea, what that means is to wipe, it basically means a second Holocaust. So it's embarrassing to hear you guys speaking of Hamas in a way that gives them aid and comfort. And if you have an idea of moral equivalence between what Hamas did on 10/7, deliberately butchering innocent women, men, and children, and babies, and you try to make a moral equivalence between that and Israel defending itself, and giving also more aid and comfort to Hamas when you cite their statistics of the human shields that they put their own people to protect their headquarters and all their arms caches, and they put them underneath hospitals, and then they cite those statistics of casualties.
All right. We're going to let Richard answer.
Let me just quickly say that we have for an hour been repeatedly condemning what Hamas did on October 7th.
Right.
There is no moral equivalence because it's all horrible. And to say that it's okay and somehow defensive for Israel to slaughter these 20,000 people already, these civilians, how is that defense? It's not defense at all. It's slaughter in Gaza.
Richard, last word.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is not a genocidal statement. It calls for Palestinian rights within a state, either Israel-Palestine or its own independent state. Hamas charter does not say that things that this caller said. It is prepared to join the PLO and give up armed resistance, and that is something that we do not recognize and should.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is it for the show. John, you have one last question?
Shalom.
Thank you, folks.
Shalom.